Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today, we're going to talk about something absolutely wild, the Dazzle Camouflage schemes, particularly of World War I. Now, modern ships are bland to look at. They're all painted some shade of gray, depending on what nation you're from. Who cares if you can see them or not? You can still detect them on radar. And you can engage a ship exclusively from a radar image without ever having seen it. That was not the case during the World Wars, particularly World War I, before radar was developed. During earlier wars, like the Spanish-American War and the Russo-Japanese War, the range of being able to target ships was relatively limited. While your guns were starting to get a range to be able to fire towards the horizon, it didn't matter because you couldn't hit targets that far out. And so many of these ships were built with guns that were intentionally limited to only be able to elevate to 15 or 20 degrees, which then limits their range. The maximum range you can get out of a shell is by elevating the gun to 45 degrees. But you didn't need all of that because you couldn't hit a target out to that range. And in those days, firing at a target basically meant that you had an officer and some enlisted guys looking through binoculars at the enemy ship and guessing the range. And they call it down to the guns, and the guns more or less know, hey, if it's at a range of 10,000 yards, 5 miles, we elevate it this much, 7 degrees, whatever the case is. For the main battery guns, 9 degrees for the secondary battery guns, 13 degrees for the tertiary battery guns, whatever, and then we can fire all this stuff at it. And we see where those shots land, and we adjust based on that. During the Spanish-American War, the U.S. Navy attained hit rates lower than 2% on enemy warships at reasonably close ranges. Obviously, that's not acceptable. You can't win a fleet engagement if you shoot all of your shells and don't hit the target. Rangefinders are developed. A rangefinder is basically a way to solve a trigonometric problem. You know the distance between the two mirrors in your rangefinder. So you've got an operator who looks through an eyepiece, and that eyepiece has prisms in it that are going to either end of the rangefinder, and this guy is dialing in what angle the prisms on the end of these arms are pointing at, and he's trying to get them to triangulate onto a target. Now, because he knows the length of his rangefinder and he knows the angle he's angled that prism at, he can use trigonometry to solve the distance from where he is to the target. With that range information in hand, it's relatively simple to guess the speed of the enemy ship and the time of flight of your projectile at that range and guess where the target will be when your projectile gets there. And so, by World War I, dreadnought-type battleships start to be armed with rangefinders. British and American rangefinders are coincidence style, which means, remember you've got two eyepieces here, you're looking through it. One of the eyepieces is giving you the top part of the ship, one of the eyepieces is giving you the bottom part of the ship, and to figure out the angle where they line up, you are just trying to see when the top part of the ship lines up with the bottom part of the ship. Then when you've got both halves of the ship in your rangefinder lined up, boom, that's the angle. You can work out a solution for your guns. The same sort of principle holds true for submarine periscopes and plotting torpedo attacks. The Allies are suffering greatly at the German hands for torpedoes. We're worried about German surface raiders. By the mid-war period, this is right around 1917 when the United States enters the war. And so the British develop what they call Dazzle Camouflage, which, far from the way that they paint the Grand Fleet in a dark gray scheme to blend into the clouds that are perpetually over the North Sea, they paint their ships in bright colors with wild geometric patterns on it. And here is a plate showing how this is done, particularly for merchant ships. So with all of those weird angles and colors and other crazy things going on that are not symmetrical in any way, they did tests and they found that it was incredibly difficult to be able to line up their ship accurately when they're looking at it through their rangefinders. Specifically the coincidence rangefinders that the Allied powers were using. And so it seemed to work. And also, the number of ships being sunk at the end of 1917 into 1918 starts to go down. So did it actually work? Well, yes and no. Dazzle Camouflage does work with coincidence rangefinders. The Germans were not using coincidence rangefinders. They were using stereoscopic rangefinders. We'll come back to that in a minute. Why does the percentage of Allied merchant ships being sunk start to go down if the camouflage scheme isn't helping them? In fact, it's brighter colors. The Germans are able to see these ships more easily. It's because they're traveling in well-protected convoys at this point. Now, with the United States in the war, they're manufacturing more ships. They're putting them in convoys. There are destroyers to protect them. Things like sonar, ASDIC, and hydrophones are making it more possible to detect submarines. The tactics are just better, and so you're seeing less ships sunk. After the war, the German fleet is surrendered to the Allies. We get a look at their stuff and we realize, holy cow, they aren't even using coincidence rangefinders like everyone else. They're stereoscopic. Coincidence rangefinders are better at staying on target and are better at shorter ranges. The Royal Navy is planning to fight its battle at 10 miles or under because that is where they believe they'll be able to see enemy ships and accurately fire at them. As dreadnought-type battleships get larger and have bigger guns on them, the ranges they're able to fire, even without being able to elevate to 45 degrees, goes out and out and out. So even though they plan their equipment for a battle at a certain range, even though they train for a battle at a certain range, the simple fact that their guns can fire further than that means that they engage targets at longer ranges. And when you start to engage an enemy target, you don't try to close the range because they're shooting at you and you don't want your ships to get hit either. So climactic battles like Jutland end up being fought at closer to maximum range. And the coincidence rangefinders just weren't that effective. On the other hand, the Germans are using stereoscopic rangefinders. That has a fixed point at the center of each eyepiece, and each eyepiece gives you a complete picture of the ship, not just the top or bottom that you're lining up. So when you are lining up your two images of the ship, you're in fact lining up that point in the middle on both of them that is like a sight on this rangefinder that you can sign up on. So you've got these two images of the ship that will show up blurry until you find the right range, and then it becomes clear, like a well-fitting pair of glasses. This finds the range to the target significantly further out and significantly quicker. And we see this at Jutland. German ships score hits on British ships faster. However, as the battle continues and the British ships use their strategy to walk their shells in to the German ships, they start to get hits and then consistently score hits over time. By this point in the battle, the German rangefinder operators, particularly the ones on the battle cruisers that have been engaged since the beginning, their eyes are killing them because they're constantly trying to focus on blurry targets and make it fit right. So German accuracy, as you go further into the battle, falls off precipitously, while British accuracy goes up. So definite benefits and downsides to each type of rangefinder. The stereoscopic rangefinders, one major benefit that they have is that the camouflage doesn't matter at all because you're not trying to use the vertical lines of a ship to match it up, the two pictures. So this does no good. It shows up briefly During World War II, there are some really weird geometric patterns. The French try a really weird zigzag pattern on some of their cruisers, but otherwise you see much more subdued patterns that tend to be shades of gray, blue, and black. And some of them are wavy type patterns, but none of these like bright yellows and pinks that you really see on World War I era ships. While the British called this camouflage scheme Dazzle patterns, when they send an embassy to the US to start to teach the United States, which is new into the war at this point, the techniques that they're using, the United States just starts calling it Razzle Dazzle camouflage. And so these short-lived camouflage schemes are collectively known as Razzle Dazzle camouflage or Dazzle paint schemes. With more and more warfighting taking place in littoral waters, do you think modern navies should return to camouflage schemes like Razzle Dazzle? Or do you think that they should stay with the solid haze gray paint schemes of modern ships? Interestingly, a couple of the Freedom class littoral combat ships and some of the coastal combatants of European navies do have slightly more interesting camouflage schemes than the solid grays, but they have not been widely adopted. Let us know in the comments section down below if you think we should bring back Razzle. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate the support. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to continue supporting the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about the museum and our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.